I'm Haley B. Miller, and this is Ohio Politics Explained, a podcast where you give us 15 minutes and we give you all the news you need to sound smart and impress your friends.
Welcome back to another episode of Ohio Politics Explained, the Sweet Home Chicago edition. I'm USA Today Ohio Bureau Chief Anthony Shoemaker, filling in this week for your usual amazing host, Haley B. Miller. This week, we're talking about the Democratic Convention in Chicago, which will be missing a major candidate from Ohio Senator J.D. Vance and Minnesota Governor Tim Walz agreeing to a vice presidential debate, Ohio's first week of recreational marijuana sales, Secretary of State LaRose asking counties to investigate voting irregularities, and we'll also talk about the Ohio Supreme Court taking up a case to decide what happens to a couple's frozen embryos after they divorce. Joining me this week is USA Today Network Ohio reporter Erin Glynn. Welcome back to the show, Erin.
Happy to be here.
Our first topic is Democrats are heading to Chicago next week for their national convention to support Vice President Kamala Harris and Tim Walz. The race has obviously shifted in the last few weeks after President Biden decided not to run again. Biden will address the convention on Monday night, Walz on Wednesday night, and Harris on Thursday. Ohio's delegates will be there, but one delegate is missing. U.S. Senator Sherrod Brown says he doesn't plan to attend the party's convention. He's in a tight race for re-election against Republican Bernie Moreno in a race that could decide control of the U.S. Senate. Erin, what's your take on the events next week?
Yes, it's definitely interesting that Senator Sherrod Brown has decided not to go. It's part of a pattern of him distancing himself from the national Democrats. He told CNN last week that he doesn't plan to campaign with Harris this fall and that he has his own schedule and he's focusing on his race. It'll also be worth keeping up with the prominent Democrats that are going as delegates, including the mayors of Cleveland, Columbus, Cincinnati, Toledo, and Dayton, and the state house leaders, Nikki Antonio and Allison Russo. So we'll see what they have to say.
Yeah, and Sherrod Brown has gone to conventions in the past, but this is a different cycle for him. This is the first time he's on the ballot the same day as Donald Trump. So this, he's running for a fourth term. So, and that race could very well decide which party controls the Senate. Another thing people are keeping an eye on in Chicago is protests. Milwaukee was fairly calm for the Republican convention, but there are some concerns about Chicago. It's a much larger city. Democrats expect protests over the Israel's war in Gaza. And the last time Democrats were in Chicago in 1996, also at the same facility at the United Center, things were pretty calm. But what Democrats want to avoid is a scene like they had in 1968 when war protesters clashed with Chicago police. So we'll have complete coverage of the DNC next week from Chicago. Our second topic we want to talk about is the vice presidential debate, now set for October 1st on CBS. Ohio Senator J.D. Vance, the Republican nominee for vice president, has agreed to debate Minnesota Governor Tim Walz, the Democratic nominee. Vice President Harris and former President Trump have agreed to a September debate, but the vice presidential debate could have a very different tone. Erin, what do you think the interest will be in a VP debate between Vance and Walz?
Yeah, it should be an interesting matchup. I mean, we've seen Walz and Vance sort of jabbing at each other since Walz was announced as the Democratic VP nominee. Walz has called Vance and Trump, quote, just weird. Vance has attacked Walz's military service, so it might be a gloves-off kind of debate. But on the other hand, as both Vance and Trump have said recently, people tend to care more about the presidential candidates than the VP nominees.
Yeah, that's true. But, with kind of the Trump style of debating and fact-checking and everything that goes on, it's the vice presidential debate could be much more about substance and issues than, the presidential debate could, who knows what direction that could go. This is also the first vice presidential debate since Kamala Harris, Mike Pence had their famous debate where the fly landed on his head. Remember that?
Oh, yeah.
Our third topic is Ohio's first week of recreational marijuana sales. Marijuana sales started on August the 6th, and sales topped $11.5 million in the first 4 days. Prices also spiked dramatically above medical prices. Overall, Ohio dispensaries sold over 1,200 pounds of marijuana flower and 173,000 units of edibles and topical ointments for non-medical use. Meanwhile, the average price last week of an ounce of flower rose about 20% to $266 per ounce compared to $222 per ounce the previous week. Erin, it's been 9 months since Ohio voters passed Issue 2 to allow recreational sales. What are your thoughts on how it's going?
Yes, it's a long gap between legalization and legal sales. I definitely noted some frustration on social media about the uncertainty of when legal sales would begin. And it was definitely a significant first week in terms of sales. So it'll be worth following to see how this affects prices as the supply and demand go up in Ohio. Prices are certainly higher in Ohio than states like Michigan, but dispensary owners have said they expect to see demand increase in the next few weeks and possibly that prices might go down in the next few months with more product availability.
Yeah, and people who live in northern Ohio, maybe if you live in the Toledo area and you can get to Michigan easily, that, they might still go to Michigan. You're not supposed to bring it back across state lines. But, for the rest of the state, people aren't probably going to make a drive like that. And of course, with the crazy election cycle that we're all dealing with, we all may be visiting our local dispensary soon. The other topic I wanted to talk about with you, Erin, is Secretary of State Frank LaRose is asking 20 counties to investigate alleged election violations. This includes some of the state's largest counties like Franklin, Hamilton, and Summit. Erin, you had a story earlier this week on this. What's going on?
Yes, so the Secretary of State's office suspects that people circulated petitions and attested to forged signatures or signatures with fake names. The office said the alleged election violations involved the petitions to place the redistricting amendment on the November ballot and fraudulent voter registration forms submitted by people working for Black Fork Strategies, which is a Ohio-based company that does canvassing and voter registration. So I reached out to Citizens Not Politicians, which is the ballot campaign behind the redistricting amendment, and they said they did not pay Black Fork to circulate petitions for their amendment, and none of the signatures they handed in were collected by Black Fork. And Black Fork has said they didn't do any large-scale petition operations this year or last year, and that they're fully cooperating with the Secretary of State's office about their voter registration program. It's also, I think, worth noting that multiple reports in the past have found that cases of voter fraud are rare, and that sometimes it turns out to be mistakes made by voters or administrators.
Yeah, it gets a lot of attention, and there's a lot of conspiracy theories out there about voter fraud, but it's very rare and is rarely ever proven. Our final topic for this week is the Ohio Supreme Court has agreed to hear the case of a Summit County couple that divorced, but the ex-wife wants to use their frozen embryos to have a baby, while the ex-husband wants them donated to other couples who want children. The Ninth District Court of Appeals said the woman's desire to become a mother outweighs the ex-husband's procreational autonomy rights. He says they're forcing him to become an involuntary parent. Erin, what's your thoughts on this case?
Yeah, obviously it's a heartbreaking situation for this couple without easy answers. Court documents say that the wife was in her late 30s during the divorce, and she was treated for thyroid cancer and told not to become pregnant for a year after that radiation treatment. So I imagine this feels pretty dire for both parties. The case does touch on the issues addressed by Ohio's newest constitutional amendment, which protects Ohioans' right to carry out their own reproductive decisions about fertility treatment, and it's supposed to prevent the state from interfering with that right. So we'll see how the justices interpret that amendment in this case.
Yeah, and one more thing before we go this week. Our colleague Jesse Baumert and Cincinnati Enquirer reporter Scott Wortman are going to be our team in Chicago for the Democratic National Convention next week. They're going to have complete coverage from Chicago all week, and Jesse will be right here on Ohio Politics Explained from Chicago next week to join Haley for a special episode of the podcast from the convention. Thanks for listening. We'll see you all next week.
Ohio Politics Explained is brought to you by the USA Today Network Ohio Bureau. You can check us out on X, formerly known as Twitter, @Ohio Explained.